Lovely. I just realised that I haven't recorded, and I promised people that I would, so I've just pressed record. You know, Beverly, laundry goddess extraordinaire.
Good evening. Most of you know me. I'm Beverly Easter. I'm the laundry goddess at the top of North Street. Been there for 12 years.
Thank you. Michael. I just need to unmute. Michael, you're muted. You need to unmute. Don't think I can do it for you. You unmute. There we go. So, no, you're going to have to. I don't have the power. I can mute you all, but I can't unmute you.
Okay, Michael, press your screen. You should see on your top right-hand corner a mute button. Just press it, and you'll unmute yourself. You got it? That'll be a no then. Do you want to unmute us all, and we'll only let Michael speak?
Okay, I've unmuted.
I've unmuted.
I've unmuted you all.
Michael's on.
Yep.
Can you hear me? Right. My career was in event production in London, mostly, and since I've come back to Suffolk, where I was brought up, I've been working with the Sudbury Chamber of Commerce, and we've just launched a promotion to celebrate Sudbury by shopping locally, because of the online sales have got so massive that in fact a lot of shops in Sudbury, particularly Winch and Blatch, have been suffering, and they've closed 3 of their branches.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Parker.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I'm Lee Parker. My business is Covershaw Insurance Services. We are independent insurance brokers based on Station Road in Sudbury. We've been in town since 2008. For my sins, I'm also a Bover District Councillor for the lovely ward of Assington. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sarah at the bottom there. I mute. There we are.
So I'm sorry I am not being seen, but I cracked a rib and I am in agony. So every time I move, I show it. So I'm a Reiki teacher and practitioner, and we have a small crystal shop on a farm in Upper Somerton, which is near Hartist.
Lovely, thank you. And James, you'll know who you are.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, how are you?
I'm absolutely fine, yeah.
Excellent. So, I wondered whether you wanted to give us like an update, or about what's happening, and some of the questions that I sent over, and then if people have got additional questions, then they can crack on with those. Over to you.
Fine. Well, I think I contacted Penny with the idea of doing this because very conscious that this is an incredibly difficult trading period, to put it mildly. It is literally the greatest recession the country's experienced on record for 3 centuries. And I ran my own business before I became an MP and narrowly survived the credit crunch. And in fact, when I was in the Treasury in March, I kept saying to all the officials, I know what it's like when the revenue simply stops, like just your cash flow literally halts, which is what happened to a lot of businesses in the credit crunch. And very aware that this is very difficult for all businesses with a few exceptions. So, wanted just to engage, which I think is really important, to hear what's going on. The key thing for me politically about the current situation, particularly with coronavirus, is that there's never been more of a case of damned if you do and damned if you don't. I've had a shop complain to me that I haven't been to visit it. I think I had an email shortly afterwards suggesting that I was effectively a super spreader and I shouldn't be going out and doing things, and that's kind of par for the course. But the most important thing is just to hear from you as businesses. Obviously, I get a lot of correspondence anyway. I think it's particularly, I do come out and see businesses. I'm going to visit one in Hadley tomorrow, but it's just, I think the days of going round and round and round and seeing lots of people, I think that's not the way to behave at the moment. So this is much better to do a Zoom with lots of you. So I'm really grateful to you, Penny, for organising, and for everyone for coming on board. I'm happy to take questions, many questions. I don't have a pub to go to later, even for a substantial meal, you know, so I just have the bedtime story at some point. But other than that, I'm yours. So yeah, happy to take questions, basically, Penny.
Okay, well, you will have received, I hope, some of the questions.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So I thought, well, I wasn't really sure how many people were going to be on this call. So if anybody had a particular question, to email me, I could send them on to you, and that will we'll stop getting duplication of, you know, lots of people asking lots of different questions. But as I sent you Beverly's question, and as she's here and so keen to talk, perhaps we could kick off with the lovely Beverly, and you could do your thing.
Okay, Beverly.
I've unmuted myself. Hello, James.
Hiya.
Hi. I really wanted to say a thank you for a start for what the government has done in this pandemic. It is absolutely, nobody knew what to do. I don't think anybody, they might have done things differently, but I don't think the outcome would be any different under any other government. So I genuinely wanted to say thank you for that. I want that passed back. And thank you for the help we've already received. I've seen you a couple of times before, and I would love you to come and visit me when you're feeling able to. For me, I'm classed as an essential service, and probably in 1950 laundrettes probably were, but they're not these days. And what I do, I'd say most of my income comes 95% through service, which is people ask me to do their washing and their ironing, and I employ 2 girls and myself. I've been really proactive since the pandemic started. I sat there in my shop, I furloughed the girls, I sat there in my shop and nobody came, literally nobody came. I put it all on Facebook. If there was businesses, if there was people who were struggling, just ring me, text me, I'll come and get it, do whatever I can. I did, so for somebody like me who's been really proactive, I did Pay It Forward, which people on the Zoom call know about, which is, I was bored, so I wanted to give my time to the key workers. So anybody who was still working, I didn't care what they did, as long as if they were still working. I basically did the washing and ironing at cost, just to give myself something to do, and people could buy that for other people. They could buy that as key worker. Penny bought one for a key worker. So, you know, and I was all over the papers with it. I was really trying really hard to give something back and not be bored. I have then bought a van and spent the bounce back loan on a van. So I now go around all the villages, and I have set days and I collect for people. Some people who are isolating. The bottom line is I'm exhausted, is the truth. I have worked really hard to earn no money. And because I'm an essential service, I don't get help. So I went to apply for this grant and was told you weren't told to close. I went for help with my insurance company. They're not going to even look at me because I was told not to close. I wasn't told to close. I'm not an essential service. I'm not really a laundrette. I do let people come in and use the dryers, use the washing machines, but for the most part, I consider myself, always have done, as being in the service industry. And that's my bugbear, is that I've been categorised by somebody who has no idea what I do. But yet my window cleaner, and I'm gonna say it, my window cleaner, who owned 2 chalets on one of those caravan sites, got £10,000 for each of those. And that's where it's all gone a bit crazy, as far as I'm concerned. He got that, and yet he said, I only earn £3 a year out of them. It's just, I'm working really hard and I'm exhausted. That's what I'm saying. And I am grateful for the help I got, but I just need to be...
Beverly, sorry, can I just clarify the help you got? So what have you had? So you furloughed your staff, did you?
I furloughed my staff for a couple of months in the summer, so that meant I did everything. I reduced my hours, so I reduced my hours. Now I'm only open Monday to Saturday, 8:30 to 1 o'clock, and I'm out on the van. So
did you get grants initially, or have you not had grants at any point?
I got a £10,000 grant, which I genuinely don't know what I'd have done without at that time.
Yeah.
And then I went and I got a 20 grand bounce back loan. And so I decided to invest that in the van, thinking that might keep me afloat. And you know what? I will stay afloat because we've cut our cloth accordingly. I'm in a fortunate position. I don't have a mortgage, but I haven't took wages. I've made sure the girls have had their wages. I've got one furloughed at the moment, and I've got one working.
Well, look, Beverly, the first thing to say is I think that it's admirable about the van because effectively you've diversified into a delivery business, which is what, you know, the economy has changed in recent months. In that, I mean, I remember quite early on in the lockdown, it came home to me when, to be honest, we placed an order with Majestic, obviously for wine and so on. And it surprised me how long it was where is this van? It's meant to be here. And the reason is, I looked down the street. We have a long street in Ashington. It was stopping at every single house for quite a long time. But the point is, you know, they never delivered before. And this whole sort of delivery economy is over. So it's brilliant that you've done that, because I can quite appreciate there have been people not wanting to come out. So you've gone to the market. I
always picked up for the elderly or the housebound. Always did. Free of charge. Me, all the staff did. We all used to do it because we're community spirited. What I'm saying is now I'm working much harder and I'm not earning any money. And now I know that's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just life.
But in terms of
that me being categorised as an essential service, please tell everybody else that I'm an essential service, because they're not using me, because they're not at work. That's what I do. So people who go to work are really busy. They might prioritise maybe spending some time with their children rather than a weekend doing their washing and ironing. They pay me to do it. That's what I do. My tag is I give you back some of your valuable time, and that's what I do.
Well, I mean, look. So £10,000 grant initially was because it was the grants for retail, hospitality, leisure. So you'd have been retail, and that was dependent on your rateable value. Yep. When we moved into the second wave, we had tiers, of course, and we had differing support, and quite deliberately, the government wanted to try and find a way of restricting it more, making it more targeted, not least because at the time, if you think of August particularly, when we had Eat Out to Help Out, we didn't know that it would kick off again. I mean,
no, absolutely.
Should have done, but we didn't, and so we started to ease off some of the support, like furlough, etc. And so we were less generous, quite deliberately. But then, once it became clear it was coming back, we then introduced grants according to effectively the rate of infection in different areas. There were more generous grants in those tier 3 areas in the north of England because, of course, they were closed down, etc. So the regime was changed, if you like. But
absolutely understand that.
Yeah. So but I think it's good that you at least diversified, and I would suggest it's brilliant that you do stuff.
I'm really proactive.
Comparatively, you do stuff for the community, but you are a business, and don't. Yeah. This is a relatively well-off area. I'm sure there'll be plenty of customers who'd be more than happy for you to go to their property and do the service.
Well, I did a leaflet drop. I did a 24,000 leaflet drop.
Brilliant. What's your rate? We've got county council elections. No, I didn't say that.
No, seriously, and I've flushed money.
Well, look, is your van branded, Beverly?
Oh, absolutely. You need to get on my Facebook page. Everything I do is branded.
Yeah, no, well, that's good. It's good. It's marketing as well, isn't it? Right. Well, look.
No, it is, and I am really good at shouting what we do, and because I'm really proud of what we do. It's just that my thing is, of being an essential service as a laundrette is outdated. I'm in the service industry, therefore I couldn't get help this time.
The government makes aggregate decisions very clunkily because it's dealing with millions and millions of people.
I know that. I do know that, James.
At least we have been able to support you through the furlough and the other grant and the bounce back loan, and you know, I hope the van is proves to be a good investment because.
So can I tell you, it's cost me £35,000 personally.
What, the van?
No, this pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been.
That's not in lost revenue. That's what it's cost me, and I'm exhausted because I'm now doing more to earn less, like going out on the van. So I want to do it, but I'm knackered. I don't know how much longer.
Yeah, understood. It will come back. I promise you, it will come back. I'm confident. With the first people in the area have had the vaccine. Some care workers in Long Melford. It will spread out. We'll get confidence back. It's going to be tough first because we've got January. There'll probably be another spike because of the Christmas period.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, as you get into February, you'll have vaccinated most of the most vulnerable, particularly people in care homes and NHS staff and care workers. Then the death rate will fall sharply. We'll feel more confident. But this is going to be the hardest part, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I know.
Even more exhausted. So I wish I could tell you otherwise. But I think the community in Sudbury has been brilliant. And, you know, I'm sure you'll survive. I'm confident, and then we'll all prosper next year.
And visit me.
I will do. I will do.
And look at my Christmas window and vote for it, please. My Christmas window is amazing, and all of you vote for it, please.
Lovely.
All right, thank you, James.
You're welcome.
I was going to work my way down the list that I sent you, but fortunately,
Yes.
Will is here, so he can put his question to you. You need to unmute yourself. There we go. You're unmuted.
Right. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm late. I was actually just chatting to my uncle about the place, but I can't remember my exact question now. But we're obviously closed. We're you know, caffeine lounge, gaming, bar. Yeah, we can't open at the moment with the tier restrictions. We've not actually even had our grant money from November, from the second lockdown. It's still not actually reached us, even though we filled out the applications, everything in time. You know, we're on the ball with that and getting the paperwork done. We have actually now been told that hopefully it'll be here by tomorrow, but you know, kind of we're not holding our breath. So we actually haven't had any help in the second lockdown yet, but still forced to close, still can't reopen, not much we can do. I think my main question was, why does the government think £2,000 is enough for companies like mine to survive closed for a month, especially when there are bills that need to be paid where those companies are not willing to give us payment holidays? It could be anything from insurance. I have to keep paying insurance. There's lots of things I've got to keep paying for this. I just can't not pay it. £2,000, yes, it helps, but it's nowhere near enough. And we're almost gone. Like we've almost got nothing left.
Yeah, understood, Will. And so have you got staff furloughed?
Yes, I've got most of them furloughed. Some of them have now had to go and try and find other jobs. We were very worried. I think it was beginning of November when the original furlough scheme was going to end and that new system was going to come in place. I had actually told all my staff, guys, I can't put you on it because I can't afford to put you on it, because we still had to contribute towards their salary, even if they weren't working. And if the business isn't making any money, can't pay them. So we were actually going to make everyone redundant. And I think technically we did at one point. But because the furlough system came back in for lockdown, we managed to get them all on. So staff-wise, they've been lucky and they've got some cash coming in, and they're grateful for that. In the original lockdown, I missed out on furlough because I was new director, new company, wasn't paying myself. Started paying myself in March, but missed that cutoff. So throughout lockdown, I was on universal credit. And as you know, there are thousands and thousands of people across the country who got stuck in that kind of not loophole, but that gap, that missed off. And so that was just painful for us, for me, because I just could not, live properly over those months.
I mean, the key thing I'd say about the grant, Will, and obviously I sympathise. I mean, we're in this constant quandary, aren't we? Which is the economy against public health restrictions. All I would, if I make a general point before coming to your specific specifics, because there are people who say, and you know, I'm not someone who likes lockdown at all, goes against all of my principles, and some people think there isn't a strong case. Well, if you look at the US at the moment, they haven't had a strong lockdown. They are nothing like as densely populated as we are. They have very severe crises now in their hospitals, because this is a virus and it spreads in the normal fashion, exponentially, doubling every so often, and that's what have happened to our hospital admissions. And so, you know, we've had to take these terrible decisions to try and limit that, and close many businesses to avoid people spreading it, right? As you all know, basic point, but very important. In terms of the support, now, lots of people, when they contact me, do what you're doing. They'll say, we've only had the following, but we've also had furlough. Furlough is still a huge injection of cash into your business from the government. It is by far the most expensive thing we've funded in terms of business support. It's many billions per month. In terms of universal credit, we've actually put in an extra 7 billion to make it more generous. Now, it's not generous, inverted commas. With any welfare system, you have a catch-22 that make it too generous, people won't want to go back to work. So in normal times, it is literally a safety net. Of course, the difficulty is, you're quite right, there have been people who've, through no fault of their own, found themselves having to rely on welfare, who would never expected to, have been shocked at the levels you get, who've not been eligible for support, because all support, public money, has to have eligibility criteria. And some of it will appear harsh to those who miss out, but it has to, otherwise you get large levels of fraud, which we would, in our own way, be castigated for. So, you know, yes, you've got so £2,000 may not seem generous, but that is primarily to fund your rent, your fixed costs, not including wages, and then the furlough is there to cover your wages. They're normally, not always, but normally they're the two main costs of a physical business, i.e. one that has premises. Your overhead of rent, stroke, you know, things that come with that, and your wages. Now, I'm not sitting here saying we'll have covered every single one of your costs, but that is still an extremely generous proposition, and is why we're sitting on, it's about coming close to 300 billion of extra borrowing this year, of which a very part is this support we've been making, which has been to keep the economy going, because it's been shut down. So I'm not sitting here saying it's extremely generous and it covers all of your costs, but in its totality, it is incredibly expensive to the state, and we are borrowing at very excessive, the largest amount since out of war in our history.
Yeah, no, I get that. You know, the total amount that the government has, you know, put back into the economy is a huge amount, but you're just, for example, me at the moment, you're possibly dragging out the inevitability that we're going to close. And
Understood.
The implication of that isn't just the business closes, but, you know, people have put personal money into this. There are personal things in the background. So the knock-on effects, not just with me, you know, my family in the business, but then all the staff then don't get furloughed. They don't get jobs. They're on universal credit, which pays a lot less. And my staff at the moment, who are getting topped up by universal credit, are having huge issues with them, where they're not getting payouts, or it gets delayed, or whatever it is.
Well, the system has been, in context of the demand put on it, the system's performed well. I say that quite sincerely. I would criticise if it hadn't, but it still buckles now and again because the pressure is huge. I think that, you know, I totally take on board what you're saying. Have you taken out a bounce back loan?
Yeah, taking it out. Unfortunately, the main thing for us is because we're a brand new company. We you know, to pay back. You know, it'll be fine. We could, you know, we can pay that back. But when we've got no income coming in because we've been forced to close, we've got no way of paying it. And
understood. But it's 12 months with no interest, and we've now lengthened significantly the loan.
That's going to help, because if there was no extra help of like lengthening that, then yeah, we would still close, because we wouldn't be able to pay it back. There's just no chance. I mean, there's still a chance that we will close down completely, you know, because we can't pay it back.
But the most important thing, Will, for you and every business, is that the economy reopens, and we've tried to do it as far as possible. And as you know, I mean, it's not a secret because every country in the world pretty much is struggling with this. Certainly every comparison to us. If you reopen, helps the economy, you get more infection and spread. And at the moment, the core of policy, and of course, a lot of my colleagues have started to say, well, hold on a minute. And they've looked and they've said, well, how serious is this illness? Look at the age of the people who are dying and all these sorts of comments. But, the fact is, no government is going to have a policy where, in effect, you say, these people are just going to be allowed to die, as it were. Now, there may come a time, if the vaccine weren't to work and, the mass testing didn't help bring down the spread and all that, and we still found ourselves facing lockdowns months from now, it may be that we'd have to ask ourselves some pretty difficult questions, particularly whether we would move to a sort of what's muted as a segregation policy, where in effect we go about our business as normal and your business would probably be fine, but people who are vulnerable are effectively,
I'm happy to abide by, lockdown rules and tier restrictions if the bills are paid.
Of course.
But at the moment, now with second lockdown and the tier structure, the bills aren't getting paid. So, me, just like so many people, especially like, I'm sure you've heard of like Cancel the Curfew campaign and all the forgotten, things with the hospitality industry. We're struggling. The whole industry is possibly going to collapse any moment, and it is starting to collapse. And there's just not enough help. There might be no pubs open in 6 months' time.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to see a pub tomorrow. I won't say which one it is. I'm going to see a pub tomorrow where they really are thinking of closing. And, that is depressing, to say the least, for me. I find it, as the MP, I find it very depressing when I see businesses shut. This is, as someone who runs a business, that is not how things should be. But the problem is people go into pubs and they get infected with a very lethal infection. Now, you saw in Hadley recently, in fact, I think it was 6 weeks ago, Baber as a district had an infection rate of 2 per 100,000. We were literally the lowest in England for about a week. Hadley, 3 weeks ago roughly, maybe 2, was 960 per 100,000. And this came from a couple of care homes, and this thing spreads. That's what it does. And the only way you can stop it until you vaccinate is by stopping social contact. And pubs exist to create social, basically we've banned socializing. Let's be honest, that's what we are doing because we have to. But when the second wave kicked off, it was quite clear. If I can share a confidence that Jay Van Tam, the Deputy Chief Science Officer, who I refer to jokingly as Jean-Claude Van Tam, I think he's quite cool. He was walking down Victoria Street in London, and I spoke to him and I said, why did the North never come down? And he said, because when they had the first wave, they just kept mixing in their houses, particularly dense populations in certain northern industrial towns, etc. So it never really went away. And that is the bottom line. It is very, very difficult. And I think if you think about it, the issue for the Treasury now is sustaining the help. There is not going to be significantly more generosity of individual pots of help. There's lots of other funding coming in. I mean, for example, as is probably it will be coming out in the press tomorrow, we've put a lot of money into mental health charities, which has benefited one local one in particular very generously, which you'll see tomorrow. We just announced millions for some of our local hospitals in terms of vital capital work. The amount of money we are doling out is exceptional. So we do have to take some view as to affordability, etc. And by and large, whilst I accept your point about the other bills, by and large, the rent, those grants cover the rent, furlough covers the staff. That should be, for most businesses, their core costs. But I appreciate there will be some other ones, and that it is difficult. But broadly speaking, this is working in keeping as many businesses open as possible. But it won't save every single one. It won't save every job, and that is an economic fact, which is why we need to reopen the economy when it is safe to do so. Yeah,
there's just one last quick point then on kind of like reopening the economy and hospitality. Obviously, I'm very defensive about the hospitality industry because working in. you know, there was huge campaigns just before the second lockdown, and especially when the 10 p.m. curfew came in, to say, why is hospitality getting blamed for these COVID cases when there's no data to suggest that COVID, you know, hospitality is to blame? And, you know, you look at schools and how many infections are happening there. You know, we've got schools in Sudbury constantly sending kids home because of COVID cases. Yet, I don't think there's been any cases come from any, let's say, venue in Sudbury, you know, hospitality-wise. You know, we've put in measures. We spent time separating all the chairs, cleaning. You know, we all put money into that, and it seems to be at a complete waste. And we also took the other side to this is we, as the industry, took a huge amount of abuse from customers, huge amount, like just completely unacceptable behaviour from customers. And I know that's not the government's fault, but that is being a repercussion of all these rules that have come in place. That
well, I mean, when the lockdown started, I found one of the hardest things to deal with was people contacting me who'd been abused, particularly people like pharmacy workers, because I think they felt in particular, you know, that at least if you're a nurse and someone shouted at you, we're all clapping for them, you know. What about pharmacists, that they were getting abused by people? It's supermarket staff were getting, I witnessed it myself, it's absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
And would, you know, I'm on BBC Radio Suffolk, the first weekend of lockdown, I was with Mark Murphy, the first call, James, please send the army into supermarkets, you know. And actually, no, sorry, people have just got to behave. And you're right, the government can't, that's beholden on all of us, you know, and it's terrible to hear that. But in answer to your question on hospitality and spread vis-a-vis schools, etc., well, the first thing I'd say on that is you have to make choices as to what you regard as the most important things to keep open. And you know, and I feel very strongly about this. The most important thing to keep open that was closed in the original lockdown is education. Obviously, not including hospitals, etc. But the things that had been closed in the full lockdown that started in late March, the thing that we decided in future we would keep open, and this has been adopted throughout the West pretty much, is schools and colleges, because the damage to young people's mental health and learning is fundamental. And for me, I mean, on a selfish basis, when my 3 boys went back to primary school in June, July, because they were in those years that were included, I felt very fortunate. It completely lifted them, it lifted the other children. My daughter was in secondary, so she didn't go back until September. It is the right thing to do, but the problem is the scientists, they won't necessarily have the data, they won't necessarily have it. But what they're saying is, if you want to keep this part of the world open, which has social mixing, etc., you've got to compensate for that by reducing mixing in other areas, because it's all about trying to minimize mixing. And so in a way, hospitality pays a price for that. But there has to be a way of controlling the infection, and so you have trade-offs. So the scientists will have said, this is why you get these weird rules which get quite Monty Python-like, you know, about the advice now about don't play Scrabble at Christmas. And again,
I think most of us would be happy to abide by these, you know, crazy rules if it paid the bills. But because now, you know, the first lockdown, yes, the grant and the bounce back loan kept us going, and we're like, yeah, fine. It was getting a bit desperate towards June and July. Well, obviously, able to reopen in July, but £2,000 is just not enough. And so,
but the original lockdown,
huge amount going to go.
That was so generous, that support. We could not afford, I don't think we could afford to maintain that level of support. We can't. You know, there is such a call on the state at the moment that we have to, our support has to fan out across the whole of the country and society. And still the most important thing is those essential public services. It's scary the amount that's gone in, and some of it will have been spent badly. I'm happy to say that, because of the speed at which things happen. I mean, you've had all these reports about, you know, people buying dodgy PPE, etc. The pace that we had to eyewitness was unbelievable. And if we hadn't moved at that pace, even more damage would have been caused. But look, my sympathy, I really hope you stay open, and like, I'd love to come and see it if we're back in normal times, which, you know, God willing, we will be. and we're doing what we can within the nation's ultimate credit limits, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, we're still plowing on with trying to do things in the background and, you know, think of new ways. You know, we're not.
I'm sure you'll be fine.
Not quitting, that's for sure.
It won't be good, but you'll get, you know, God willing, you'll survive and then prosper.
Yeah, but if we do have to go into any other lockdown, or let's say we go into tier 3, £2,000 is not going to cut it, and you know, just two.
I sincerely hope we don't go into tier 3, but I'll tell you what, unfortunately, Suffolk, the figures are a bit all over the place at the moment, and London is bad. So who knows? Fingers crossed. But it is. Yeah, this is not a nice thing to be governing through. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, no, I know it's not. I don't think any parliament or government would have expected something like this. So, and I don't think there's a wrong or right way of dealing with this. Nobody knows.
There's no magic. There really is no magic answer. So I'm just trying to be as transparent with you as possible and honest about the situation. And you know, I can say good luck. It doesn't really help, but you know, I suspect you'll be all right. But yeah, we'll keep trying to help as much as we can.
Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Well, I'm going to pop across to David on my top left, and then Beverly, I have seen that your hand is raised, but well, no, it's not. Well, if we speak to David first, and then we can come back and maybe read another question that was sent earlier.
Sure.
Here, so over to you, Mr. Smith.
Hello.
If we can get some. Hang on. I'm gonna unmute everybody.
Okay, are we unmuted?
That's it. All good.
Right. Firstly, can I thank you, Penny, for organising this evening, and James for coming into the Lion's Den. I'm going to be extremely critical and also complimentary of the government and what they've done to date. I think the Chancellor has done a wonderful job with what he's trying to do. It's a very difficult balancing act to keep everybody happy. And if we can condense this and look at what affects us and also the nation as a whole. Firstly, the nation as a whole, we've seen the North go into tier 3 and lockdown measures, and yet London, which has probably got similar rates to the North, seems to avoid everything. And I think we are in danger of the Eton elite and also the Labour at Chelsea elite basically avoiding any of the problems which the North is facing. So if we're going to face this as a country, let's do it together and not just have this North-South divide. We are where we are, and it's a question now, what do we do to move on? We're looking at 2021 is just around the corner, and we take Sudbury and this particular area, West Suffolk. We've lost Delphi. We've lost Advent. Yes, I know there's a chocolate manufacturer gone in there, but it's not going to be employing the same number of people. Vanner's in Sudbury is going. Winch and Blatch, which is the main retailer in the town, is going. What are we going to do, or what are you going to do as a government to try to replace this? We've seen the unacceptable system with the rating system at the moment. The fact if businesses appeal about their rates, appeals are taking 2, 3 and longer years to be resolved. In the meantime, the business has got to keep on paying. At the moment, we have a stamp duty holiday. Is that going to be continued, or is it going to be brought to an end at the end of March? That's kept the property market going, and the property market is buoyant because people are moving out of South Essex and the Greater London area up here. Our local authorities, they're not working properly. Most of their staff are working from home, which, as we all know, is fraught with problems. That is causing delays within the planning system, it's causing delays in stamp duty, and it is causing delays in the normal functions of those local authorities. And this is where the government has got to be positive and actually do something. I'm concerned that and James, you made the comment that we are in recession. I don't think we've seen the worst of this as yet. I think next year, when the redundancies kick in and we start to see businesses on the high streets failing, then I think you're going to see what I call a recession, probably similar to something which probably most of you aren't able to remember, but what happened to the market in 1988, when it just collapsed after the government did away with double mortgage tax relief. The people that are going to benefit out of this are people like Amazon and online companies that, because of the way they're structured, do not pay their fair share of tax to the revenue. They take, they do not give back. And this is where you as a government have got to do something. We've got to get away from this basis of the current system of government we've got, but basically it's got to accept that you need to reflect the needs of the majority, not the views of the minority, the so-called elite that have a disproportional say with everything. You've got a difficult job to do, James, but why on earth, when we went into this pandemic, didn't we have a coalition just dealing with the pandemic? Bring on board the other parties that are in Westminster, so we had a unified approach. And why on earth has it taken this long to get rid of Mr. Cummings? Thank you.
Well, there's about 27 questions there.
Yeah.
But the Eton elite thing is just a load of old cobblers, right?
No, I disagree.
Wait a minute.
Not.
Now, you've asked a lot of questions. I'm going to give you plenty of answers.
Good.
I went to state school. My kids go to state school. They go to Boxford Primary and they go to TGS. Yes, so went to Eton. So did David Cameron. David Cameron's an excellent Prime Minister. Boris Johnson is Prime Minister under the most extraordinary crisis this government any government has faced for literally decades. Comments like that, I just don't think. I mean, Keir Starmer, I wouldn't describe as, you know, particularly. He wasn't a blue-collar worker, but it doesn't bother me. You know, I think he's actually a competent leader of the opposition and a competent leader of the Labour Party. Anyway, the point is, those sorts of things don't exactly help the picture. To take the particular point, stamp duty holiday, can't comment on what's going to happen to the tax rates. That's something that the Chancellor has to announce in the budget, obviously. I do accept the impact it's had. Obviously, part of that was because when the property market was completely locked down for, you know, April and May because of social distancing, we then allowed surveyors to go back to survey properties. We allowed people to view properties physically. We allowed removals men to go in removals people and so on. And so therefore the market started to unlock. Then the stamp duty came in, because when the property market is functioning, it creates a lot of economic impact. As we all know, it helps mortgage brokers, solicitors, removals companies, interior design and general retail. So, you know, an active property market is good for the economy. And actually, we need people to be moving to free up properties so that people can move up the ladder and so on. But what happens next, I mean, that's a decision for the Chancellor. In terms of Amazon and this situation, I would say, I mean, first of all, Amazon have invested in this constituency very heavily in Sproughton with a very large investment, which I'm obviously very grateful for. I personally think, the key thing about Amazon is they are a brilliant company and they don't have a natural monopoly. It's amazing to think they're so dominant, but they have no natural monopoly. There's nothing to stop anybody competing with them. If, you know, there are companies all over the world who have a natural monopoly. National Grid have one now, they're regulated. But the point is, it's not a natural monopoly. It's simply they are so good at what they do. And I don't say that pejoratively. As a factual observation, you order through Amazon, you're pretty sure you're going to get it. Customer service is very good. It's an ingenious company. And I hope that we can get competitors who are British-based, who can compete with them, geniuses who are...
James, you're missing the point. They're killing the high street.
I'm coming to that. Just give me a sec. I'm not missing the point at all. I'm telling you why they're so successful. And businesses, the best way for businesses to respond normally is to follow the market rather than try and hope that the state will somehow take action against one of their competitors. And the thing is, at the end of the day, we all use them. You know, it's like complaining about supermarkets. We all go to supermarkets. In terms of the tax situation, Britain is one of the only countries pursuing a digital tax. We are potentially facing trade retaliation from the US because of this. And so actually the best thing that could happen is for countries across the world through the OECD to come up with a agreed way of taxing digital businesses. Because what we don't want is to get into a sort of protectionist tit for tat situation, but it's very difficult to tax them. It should not be underestimated. The problem is Amazon are digital, they are flexible, they're not just sitting there like a sitting duck on the high street. Whereas businesses on the high street are much easier to tax, I'm afraid. I don't say that, again, discriminatorily, it's just a statement of fact. And business rates are a terrible tax. It's an ancient tax. You can say what you like about it. it raises about 30 billion normally. Now that is not a minor amount of money. And at the moment we have huge demands on the exchequer, from the health service to education, where people generally expect more spending. And at the moment, as you know, it's going out the door rather large quantities from Her Majesty's Treasury. So where I think we've got to be looking here in terms of what can the government do, I think, yes, we do need to look at a digital tax, but fairly applied, ideally internationally through the OECD. We do need to look at reforming business rates as we've promised, but we should be under no illusion that it's easy because of the revenue they raise. And I think that locally we need to think of how can we make our part of the world more attractive to footfall. What are its assets? And here I think something we were looking at in the task force that I set up when, as you said, Delphi closed. You're referring to the impact we've had. And something we've been looking at is, if you think, what is amazing about South Suffolk, this constituency, is it has two of the greatest artists in the whole world within its boundaries. We have Constable and the Haywain down at Flatford. We have Gainsborough's House in Sudbury. We now even have in Hadley, Benton End, which actually has an amazing artistic story for modern artists. Those who train there, William Morris, of course. We had the East Anglian Art School. So there's an amazing story there. And I think with what's happening at Gainsborough's House, there's a real opportunity to make ourselves an attraction, because visitor tourism footfall tends to bring greater spend onto the high street. And if you add into that improving the centre of Sudbury through pinch point funding and other sorts of funds, what hopefully we will go for with a levelling up fund, this new fund that the Chancellor announced, I think that we can be optimistic. Obviously, we've got to get through this very difficult phase, but I think in all of your points, there is something positive going on. On the north-south divide and the tiers, I don't know if Professor Whitty went to Eton or Jean-Claude Van Tam. The reason we have the tiers as we do is because of the advice from the scientific officers. Now, it's not just about infection rate, it's about hospitalisation as well. London is a very young city, so its hospitalisations are much lower. However, you only have to look at the internet and what the Secretary of State for Health has said to see that, unfortunately, in London, it is looking like it may move upwards. But I don't think anyone should speculate on that. But I think it may well be changing tiers at some point because of the direction of infection. But it's not as simple as just comparing infection rates per 100,000 in different areas. There's lots of other factors. And it will have a huge economic impact if London goes into tier 3. So it's not something we should do wantonly. But you're right, there is, and I have colleagues in the north who do feel some resentment. Their constituents certainly do, but I suspect they will get their wish potentially before too long.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Can I just come back on that, Penny, on one or 2 points?
Yeah.
I talked about local authorities where most of the staff now are currently working from home.
Sorry, you did, yes.
Yeah, and the delays that is causing with planning applications, with searches, which isn't helping the situation at the moment. Now, I'm not knocking local authorities, but those local authority staff that are working from home are getting their full pay. They're probably getting an allowance to work from home, and yet we've heard of people being furloughed, businesses who are potentially struggling, owners of businesses who are running at a loss, having to subsidise their businesses. The local authorities have got to step up to the mark. And the other comment I would make on that, on business rates, is why can't we have the business rates coming back directly to the local authority so the businesses can see what is happening to their money, not being lost into the coffers at Westminster? Well,
I mean, obviously on the local authority, I don't speak for the local authority, but I try and work as closely with them as I can. I think it's unfair when we have, as a central government, have advised people to work from home unless it's essential, not unless they have no choice. It's quite in order, therefore, for local authority staff to work from home. They are doing. But
it doesn't work in this area where
they're doing what they're doing because what they've been advised from public health.
They might have been advised, but it does not work because we do not have broadband connectivity in this area compared to the major cities.
My connection
infrastructure is not good enough.
Hold on, my garden office, I've got better broadband here than I have in Westminster. I can tell you that much.
You might have. You're fortunate, but a lot of this area does not have it.
It's when I first got elected, broadband was the most common item of correspondence. You're right, there are still some areas, of course.
There are a lot of areas.
Improvement in access to super fast broadband in this area has been dramatic in terms of percentage of penetration. But your point was that local authority workers essentially shouldn't be working from home. They have been told to by the government. I mean, it's because the public health consideration trumps the other parts of it. As it happens, my experience, the planning system, what I've heard, it's obviously nothing is working as well as it does in normal times. But my understanding is actually the delays have not been that bad given the circumstances we're in. And you know, I think that there are lots of things we could do to improve the planning process. I think it's difficult. It's difficult for smaller local authorities to recruit the sort of people you can recruit if you are a well-funded, you know, planning consultancy or whatever. And I think that is an issue. But as the fundamental point, work from home, that's the right thing to do because of the Public Health Directive. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As we've touched on the high street, I thought it would be a good time to just pop down to Sarah from Duck and Boots, because I know that she's got some issues. You're going to have to unmute yourself. Okay. There we go.
Hi everybody.
Hi.
And hi James, thank you very much for this opportunity this evening. It's really appreciated. I run a shop in Sudbury Town Centre. I'm on Jail Lane. I actually opened my business back in 2017. I've moved off of Market Hill, and I think ultimately the whole situation is going to be crap, whatever you do, because I think there's always going to be someone who misses out, and it's not going to be ideal for everybody. The problem that I'm encountering at the moment is that I am actually entitled to grants that I have been rejected on. So I have 3 properties. Each one is on the rates register and separately rated. And if it wasn't for the current rates freeze, I would actually be paying rates on those all properties now. And I applied for the grants during this lockdown, as I'm entitled to do so, and I was rejected, even though I'm a retail business and I'm also a hire business. So similar to things like village halls, we hire the spaces out. None of us really understand why I've been rejected. I have to say, Lee's been extremely supportive over the situation for me. But as it stands, I face closing, because in November, when we were obviously deemed as non-essential and had to close, the pop-up shops I have outside also had to close. So my business in November saw us lose a huge amount of income at a time of year that's supposed to set us up for the quieter period that's coming. And not only did I lose that income, but I've also had to refund a huge amount of revenue that I was relying on, and now with no opportunity to recover any of that. And because the council are taking their time and have not processed my appeal, I can't even advertise for other businesses to now use those pop-ups, which is meaning now I'm losing money every single day. So that's the situation I'm in. And it's just really disappointing. I don't really understand why there's only 60% take up with the local grants as it is. I tick all the boxes. We support small businesses, which is really what is needed right now. And it just seems that we're overlooked.
So have you had, I mean, you know, it's always difficult when it's a specific case, and I'm happy to discuss it offline in more detail, but did you have any grants in the first phase?
No, I was between premises. I was supposed to take on large premises in March, which got delayed, and luckily so, because obviously then COVID hit and I would have been in big trouble. So we moved into premises in August. And so this time we were entitled to grants. I had my letters to each individual property because of its eligibility, because they're all individually rated. And I made my applications. I made an error on my first application. I put all my properties under one account number because I'm a sole trader. I then resubmitted it under each individual account number. I had one grant for one property and was denied on the other two, even though the other two trade in their own right. I pay rates on them, or will pay rates on them separately. I have my own lease agreements. They both had to shut down.
Sorry, you did get a grant on one of them?
On one, but they've rejected the other two, even though they are, and the one grant doesn't even cover my rent. So let alone anything towards the refunds I've had to process, the expenses and the loss of income.
And did you apply for the discretionary grant scheme as well?
Well, the pods outside were not trading this time last year.
Right.
And my main business, because we were between premises, I was trading from home. The income I was, the revenue from last year was considerably lower to what it would be now we're back in premises. So I haven't applied for it because I don't think we're technically eligible.
So sorry, you know are those pods the ones where near the car park, which are sort of, so you own them?
Yeah.
But it's not your, but you are a landlord of those, or are you your business in them as well?
No, my landlord, I lease them separately, so I'm the tenant, and then I have a sublet agreement, so different businesses can appear in them. We remain the host business, that's why my branding is on them. We use them ourselves, and then otherwise we let businesses appear in them because it saves them taking out and committing to long-term leases, which for a lot of businesses is scary.
And Sarah, the great thing about that is, as I think you all know, one of the great weaknesses in our part of the world, and it's just one of those things in relatively smaller towns, is there's been a real surge recently in demand for flexible office space, and there really isn't much around Sudbury, unless I'm very much mistaken. I think, so my company, when we founded it, we never took offices, but the problem with that, the one problem I find remotely, and it goes back to the previous question, there are unquestionably problems with work from home. The big problem is taking staff on. If you want to train people, it's much harder. So we used to go into the Regis at Chelmsford, right next to the station, because our people were all around the region. And I looked for one in Sudbury, and there really wasn't that sort of something you could take for like a month, or even something you can in London. There are places you can hire for a day, you know. And I think I'm out of touch. There may be places like that now, but I think that's a really good thing to have.
There's an office like room that you can hire that is just going to be opening. Very different from the pods. Just like a kind of freelancer hub that will be it's just off the bottom of Market Square. Which is,
all right.
Yeah. It's not quite open.
I mean, look, Sarah, I would say, is Barry's leaving? I think, did he have a question on the, I can still answer his question on the email, because I think it was one back.
Oh yeah. So I can tell you here, Barry's.
But Sarah, the thing is, you know, I do try and answer these questions, like I did with Beverly, about, and with Will, about the specifics, but generally, it's always best for you to email me the details, because, you know, I have to ask you some personal financial questions really to try and understand. Because each case, I famously, I was on BBC Suffolk, and this is not criticise any of you, but just to show what it can be like. I was on BBC Suffolk with a guy who owns a load of pubs in this area, complaining he'd had no help. And so Mark Murphy was saying, James, this man's had no help whatsoever. And he said, you know, I've had no grants at all. Okay, I've had four of them for 25 grand on my pubs, but one of them we have, and it's like, you know. It's always best for you to email me you know, this is what I've had access to this scheme. There's lots of schemes, there's self-employed scheme, it's complicated. Sarah, if you're happy to, if you can email me, we can look at the detail a bit more, because it's important for me to understand why people fall through the cracks. And it's not intended, but there will be some technical sort of explanation potentially, or not, as the case may be. So Sarah, if you email my parliamentary office, that'd be great. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I'll put my...
Lovely. I can. I know Barry's had to leave, but I can read out the question. He said, Barry, by the way, is a GDPR expert.
Oh yeah, that's it.
He's been to a lot of my Zoom meetings, so he's got to know some of us really well, and he's helped me out on a couple of issues and the charity that I work for too. So his question is, if the UK does not get a Brexit deal and we don't get a data protection adequacy decision, what will the government do about data sharing with the EU?
Well, I'm so disappointed he's left, because he's scared. He sounds, as an expert on this, I bet he knows a lot more than I do.
He does know a lot.
But look, I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with GDPR, which replaced the original Data Protection Act. So the position is that when we leave the EU, out of the transition, we become a third country, like the US, China, Australia. And what the EU does with third countries is it gives them, in various sectors, effectively alternative ways of verifying that they're basically sound. So we'll have this issue for lots of sectors if there's no deal. So, for example, plant, there's a seed merchant in Bures, they'll have to get their, we'll have to be recertified as a country where seeds are acceptable to come from, and so on. In terms of data, yeah, the issue is are we going to be seen as you know, having a verifiable and acceptable regime? What I've learned is that there was a piece in a European website, equivalent of RPA, I think, which is not definitive, but apparently came from a good source, that what the government will do is, in the event of no deal, is extend for 6 months the current arrangement. So what's that word again? I hate that word. Can you just repeat the question, Penny?
Yeah. If the UK does not get a Brexit deal and we don't get a data protection adequacy decision.
Oh, adequacy, that's it. That's it. So this word adequacy means third countries, if they pass the adequacy test, you can basically trade with them from a data point of view as if you were a member of the EU broadly. And so that's what we'd like, but of course it doesn't happen immediately. So I think this is not formally confirmed, but as I say, in a very authoritative article, the suggestion is a 6-month extension of our current position. But if anyone's worried about this, and it's a very sensible thing to be cautious about, the ICO, which is the Information Commission Office, this is the UK regulator of data protection. On their website, they have a section about something called SCCs, standard contractual clauses, which you can insert into a contract with a company if we weren't verified. So if you have that in your trading contract, you could then trade with the EU. It's just some extra red tape to put in, unfortunately, if we don't pass that test. So there are things that can be done, and I would point any company to the ICO website.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll let him know. Well, he's recording, so I will tell him that. Well, as we kind of touched on the EU, perhaps we could go to Andrew. If you unmute. Shall I? Yep.
Yeah, okay. Good evening all. Well, James, briefly, really, I'd like you to listen very carefully to farming leaders with regard to seasonal labour. It's so very important to the horticultural industry. We desperately need guys to come in and pick our fruit and veg. There is local labour available, and we indeed have used some local labour, but it is by no means going to fill the gaps that will arise. I know you've been pressured by local farming leaders, so I urge you to listen very carefully to their thoughts. But linked to that, I'd like to ask a very simple question. January the 1st, cliff edge or sunny uplands, and over what time scale?
Well, Andrew, I mean, the first thing to say, to take this in reverse, is I'd love to think it's sunny uplands. I mean, the thing about the current media coverage is, as anyone knows in a negotiation, everybody plays a kind of game, don't they? Now, I do think genuinely, unfortunately, someone who really hopes we get a deal and accepts there are significant adverse consequences of no deal, I'm afraid that is where we seem to be heading, because the two sides are failing to find a compromise, and that's frustrating. So I'd like to say 1st of Jan, it will be sunny uplands. I certainly think that if we get a deal and at the same time the vaccine is rolling out, I think next year could be incredibly positive. It will give us that sense that all businesses need of knowing where we're going, confidence, some certainty about the future, particularly as you know, referring back to Will and the other businesses, as social distancing, we hope, touch wood, etc., falls back as we vaccinate the population. Let's hope we get to that. So in terms of, I hope it's something that happens, maybe not on the 1st of January, Andrew. You know, it won't happen quite that quickly, but maybe as we move into the spring. I think that's the sort of timescale we've been given by the experts. In terms of farming, I'm doing a Zoom with the NFU tomorrow afternoon, that's actually primarily about the new announcement we've made on transition, on moving to the new replacement for the Common Agricultural Policy. But I'm sure there'll be people asking about tariffs and what happens and so on. In terms of labour, look, this is such an important question, and I think, you know, in the debate that followed leaving the EU, I do not apologise for this, because some people would not have made this point, but I made the point repeatedly, my fear that if we leave, we won't have lower immigration, we'll just have it from further away, which, you know, some people think is a comment that implies we don't want people to come from certain continents, which of course it isn't. I'm making a factual observation. And I'm afraid that has been borne out. European immigration has collapsed into the, I mean, obviously coronavirus has been a collapse in immigration because people aren't traveling around, but in the months leading up to coronavirus, before it happened, EU immigration was falling off a cliff, and at the same time there was a huge increase in immigration from countries like India, China, etc., which I think is really interesting. And for me, one of the reasons for this comes back to your sector, which is that it doesn't matter what rules you put in place on immigration. If you need those workers, and I say need with a capital N, you will find a way in your system to grant visas or whatever to do so. And in terms of seasonal workers, we won't have free movement, but I think the government have been fairly clear that we will have a seasonal labour scheme to enable people to come. But I'll just say, you mentioned local workers, Andrew, and you know, you're running a business, so this is absolutely not a criticism of you. I've had a lot of discussions with Susanna Rendell about this, who owns the fruit farm there. In fact, at my behest, she came in front of the Working Pension Select Committee when I was on it to discuss why we're so dependent on foreign workers. And when lockdown kicked in, I have to say I struggled with the idea that lots of my constituents are losing their job, and we were still planing in thousands of people from Lithuania and so on, Romania in particular, to come and, you know, and there were the RICS trucks going out in beers, etc., all full of Romanians in the middle of a lockdown with high unemployment and lots of risk of infection. And, you know, to me, Brexit must mean, and this is tough for the country, but it must mean that we as a country, our natively educated workforce, do more of those jobs. It has to be, because we can't sustain the levels of immigration we had before, politically or for all kinds of economic, social reasons, etc. And I think it would be good for us. I mean, when we had lockdown, we had beautiful weather for most of March and April. We were very lucky. We even, as a Treasury, allowed people to get their furlough and work in the fields on top of that. And we still didn't get very many. I mean, there were some, and it was good. I was corresponding with them because people contacted me who missed out on furlough. And I said, look, I know a farmer who's looking for people, and they literally went and picked fruit in the sun. They got out of their house and out of their lockdown, got a tan, and got double wages, if you like, you know. So there was a good story there. But in the long run, we have got to find a way of getting more British people to do it.
But it always is going to be a seasonal job. It's not a great career move to take a job that will only last 6 to 9 months of the year. And the other side to this is that I've got a great team here. Most of them have been with me for several years.
Yeah.
And they look forward to going home in the winter months, where most of them are developing houses and hopefully having a family there themselves. But what they're being forced into doing now is to signing up for the right to remain in the UK. Well, they don't actually want to remain in the UK. And they're being asked to sign the document, which of course may well, in many cases, promote that that they will stay in this country instead of what.
Which is a huge irony, and I accept that. I mean, I think so. There will be a seasonal worker scheme anyway, and the
but
problem
only for 6 months. It's not going to be long enough for most.
Well, Andrew, the problem is our previous system in terms of EU workers didn't have any red tape. It relied on this old-fashioned idea called the market. You know, there was a need for labour, they would come over and fill those positions. Whereas, and this is therefore for Conservatives is ironic, with the visa system that we all have, we'll effectively have to allocate quotas of staff, won't we? By definition, which is why I think and maybe fruit picking is a bad example, because I suspect that will always to a certain extent be done by overseas workers. But I do think there are lots of areas where there's a real chance for companies to invest into both technology and into staff being more productive, that they earn more per head, and we become less reliant on migrant labour. We have to, because otherwise you will not see the sustainable growth in wages over the long term, which I think could come from Brexit, actually, personally. We were too reliant on those brilliant, and they're brilliant. Most profound political experience for me was going to Romania, when really it was still a communist country. And those people, the history they had in the 20th century, they were so happy to be able to come to Britain, a country they all admired because of our role, basically in the Cold War and the Second World War. And when certain people stood up in the referendum and made them out to be sort of, like a horrible, curse on this country, I was very ashamed of that. They are incredibly hardworking and brilliant people, and I have nothing but admiration for the people of Eastern Europe, but we have to find a way of sustaining it.
Please don't have the opinion that seasonal workers from Eastern Europe are on a low wage. They are now on a very good wage, and we're way beyond those minimum pay rates.
Oh, I make the point in generality, Andrew, in terms of, I think what is, because a colleague of mine had a debate on this, and you have to be very careful, because a lot of people say, well, if you have less immigration, you have higher wages. That's not true. You only get that if you get investment as well, because otherwise it's just inflationary and it won't have the impact. So I accept that point. You have had to pay more. It's not, with the national minimum wage that we have now, there is no sector really which is, you could say is dirt cheap. I worry about the wages in social care personally, because I think you're paying people the same for stacking shelves as you are for looking after the most vulnerable in society. That is a fundamental weakness of that sector. But in the long run, we have got to find a way that more people in this country do more of those sorts of jobs, but in a way that is more rewarding to them, basically. Yours is probably an exception, but certainly in terms of social care, we've got to make it more like something, what you might call a profession, really, put it bluntly.
Yeah. Thank you, James, very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We take another question from, got an anonymous one here. And it's also kind of linked in with like the grant help, and I have another one that's related as well to it. So I'll read them both out, because I think you might be able to answer both of them at the same time.
Yeah.
So I know that small businesses have been given grants, but what about the ones who are not established enough as yet and do not show a profit and therefore do not pay tax? They're the ones who need the help to keep going. And then there's another one. As a small limited company and a home-based business, I take a small salary, and dividends, grants, etc. have been made available for businesses with premises and also the self-employed. There have been no concessions or grants available for directors in my position. Will that be changing soon? I've actually had a couple conversations with limited directors and what have you about this, who haven't been able to access some of the grants that other people have. So
yeah, they're very, very good questions. So if we were in Parliament, this issue would have been raised probably at the beginning by one of the opposition spokesmen. They call it the excluded.
Yeah.
So there was a debate on this in Parliament yesterday, on the so-called excluded, which is the group of people who essentially, through a whole load of different eligibility rules, didn't receive the support they would have expected to, or which people who to them are no different have received, and who feel therefore, inverted commas, excluded. Of course, I'm bound to put the government view, which is that it's not as simple as that. So to take, so the main categories, you haven't raised it, but it's important to illustrate the point. It's important to show them. So the excluded campaign will refer to 3 million people. The biggest chunk of that, 1.5 million people, is because our self-employed grants, which are very generous for those who receive them, £14 billion of expenditure so far, they are for what are called the majority self-employed. So people whose main income is their self-employed income. But of the excluded, 1.5 million are people who are minority self-employed, of which their average income self-employed is between £2,000 and £4,000. So it would have been a very odd thing for the government to somehow make recompense for that, given that they'd have had a primary income, which is effectively how they feed themselves and live, what we should be supporting, so they could have been furloughed. But there are many cases where people would have been retired, who have a pension, have a small amount of freelance income. So no, we've not supported those, and it would have been, we think, not a good use of taxpayers' money, because those people did not rely on that income to survive. Of course, the individuals would like to have had more income, but we felt that there was a justifiable reason from a public expenditure point of view not to do so. The two groups you raise, so new businesses, which actually Will was affected by this, new employees, new businesses. The new employees one has kind of disappeared because of the extension of furlough, because there were people who missed out on the first round of furlough, who then obviously were able to join later. But in terms of new businesses, they both come from the same factor, which is fraud, which is that when we launched furlough, we didn't allow anyone to be furloughed who had gone on payroll the day after the furlough scheme was announced. There's a very good reason for that, which is before it was announced, no one knew about it. Once it was announced, you could defraud the system. And I've been shocked in the Treasury. I'm afraid it happens. There's enormous fraud going on all the time, organised crime and so on, and we have to be vigilant. This is public money. And likewise with the self-employed, if you're a new business who hasn't filed a tax return, HMRC has literally no way of knowing you're there and proving your income. So you could have had some very sort of paper-based attempt to prove that, but it would have taken months to set up, been very expensive to oversee. So again, we took the view that, unfortunately, therefore, people in that situation would have, like Will, gone on universal credit. It's not ideal, but the cost and bureaucracy would have slowed down the delivery of these support schemes enormously. The company directors one is particularly interesting. So I am someone who's been still a director. The company I set up, take dividends, and it's difficult this because if we're completely blunt and honest, there's a very good reason why people pay themselves a small PAYE and take dividends. And HMRC are not too keen on the reason for it, shall we say. But the real problem from a tax point of view, that it's, again, impossible to prove. It's very difficult to administer because on a tax return, if you look at the dividends question, it asks three questions. Are your dividends in the UK, or are they from abroad? Are they from a unit trust or some other complex, some other investment? It doesn't say, are they from you as a director, as if you were paying yourself an income. They don't say, are they from a share portfolio? So we would have had no way of differentiating. So we could have been paying out on dividends received by wealthy individuals with share portfolios. And again, it was felt that is not a good use of taxpayers' money. So what directors would have received is PAYE, the amount they pay themselves in PAYE, but most importantly, their employees would have been furloughed, their businesses could have received a bounce back loan. And I think if we're honest, the problem is that may be true of if you like, a standard company, but a lot of people have created companies or ways of remunerating themselves that are perfectly legal, but they are not conventional and very tax efficient. But you know, for HM Treasury to find a way of compensating that, very, very difficult, very, very time consuming. And so it has led to a lot of frustration and a lot of challenging correspondence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking to a lot of people who are in that situation as directors. Now, I'm not limited. I'm a sole trader, and so I got all the grants that were available, and that's fabulous. But I might be talking to someone who's got exactly the same income as me, yet they're limited, and they get nothing. Maybe they don't employ anyone. You know, they've seen their income drop. It's just, I appreciate it's a difficult one, but I think it's something that should be raised because it is.
I mean, Penny, fundamentally, you have to remember, dividends are a return on investment. Now, it may be that people construct their sort of remuneration in such a way that it's really a replacement for PAYE, but that's not a conventional thing. If you're a dinner lady, you don't get dividends. You know, you're paid POA. And when we stepped in to support incomes in the crisis, we were supporting wages. I don't think that's controversial at all. No country in the world that we're aware of has supported dividends, return on investment. But I take your point. There will be many cases where you get that situation. And Penny, and I think on the chat there was a question.
There is a question about self-employed and well, there you go. What about the self-employed who have put in tax returns? They're so small at the moment, they're not yet paying tax.
I don't quite. Well, obviously.
I think what
I don't quite understand that.
What saying is that as a new business, you might have only just started putting in your tax return. You still need the help. You still need to pay bills and everything.
Yeah, but it's saying in terms of what the tax. I mean, look, the new business thing again. It is that point about fraud. The HMRC has only got the system it's got, and that is how it verifies income. Now, you could have had some really complex thing of saying, look, you send in all these things, we can verify that you've been trading legally. The time and cost in that. Now, unfortunately, and it seems harsh to those who've been on the wrong side of this, but you have to, in government, make these eligibility decisions. I mean, one of the toughest ones is 50,000. There are lots of plumbers out there who are, and I've had emails from them, who have a net profit of 52,000, and they are so angry with us. But we put a line at 50,000 net profit because the average income of people who are self-employed and earn over 50 is 200,000. Now, that's to us not an effective use of taxpayers' money. You could have put the limit at 60, but people on 61 would be unhappy. So there are people who've, inverted commas, fallen through the cracks, and it is difficult, and some of them will have ended up trying to go universal credit, and they won't have got it because they've got savings, and they'll be spitting mad and feel they've lost out. But you know, nobody has been deliberately excluded. You have to have eligibility rules with these schemes, or you get large-scale fraud, and they become undeliverable. And the one thing I'll say, and I witnessed this, I was in the Treasury in March. The pressure we were under to get these things live, to get furlough paid out, because companies were going to go under. And so we had to move at pace, and that meant you had to have very broad eligibility rules. You couldn't have, you know, drop-down questions of X, Y, and Z to work it out, and then potential manual assessment. No way. We had very brutal eligibility rules in a way in that sense, but it has delivered for most people.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely, thank you. Well, I'll make sure that they get a recording of this. So.
Yeah. And they are welcome to email me. I mean, it is. You know, I've had a lot of correspondence. Treasury, we get huge correspondence on this. There was a debate yesterday, but it's technically very challenging to deal with these specific groups.
Yeah, I was actually then just going to go and pop to Michael, but he's disappeared. But I will unmute Beverly, who you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Done it.
Hello, yeah.
One of the other things that I wanted to talk about was the parking that has been restricted in Sudbury. Obviously, the idea was for social distancing. So North Street, which is where I am, and Market Hill, which obviously is quite a good hub there for shops. And at the same time, bringing in traffic wardens. I think we should have traffic wardens. The parking situation was appalling. Some people park, it's horrendous. But my point is that if you work in Sudbury, there is nowhere to park all day apart from down at Kingfisher. And I suppose that's for, you can park there all day because you go on the train somewhere else. But if you work in Sudbury, there is nowhere, like me, I'm in North Street. So from Kingfisher, for me to walk up to North Street to my shop, there's nowhere for me to park. And I think that I would rather pay, you know, where we've got the Siam area, which is 3 hours free parking. I'd rather pay £1 a day to be able to park there for a little bit longer than 3 hours. And I think that needs to be looked at, that there needs to be a designated area in that parking area even.
I have to say, first of all, Beverly, I like the van. I can see it now.
You want to wait till you see the back of it.
All right, okay. But the look, it always makes me, you know, it's interesting. Even with all of the issues raised tonight, and with all of the, you know,
I'm bringing up parking.
Guess what the most common subject raised is?
I get that.
And hold on, Beverly.
But we're trying to bring people to town. We're trying to bring people to town.
I get you. But this is where I'm sorry, you know, and this is the town council, and this is not a matter for Parliament and UK government. I'm so pleased to say that, because parking it's perennial. I mean, you know, Long Melford has the same issue, doesn't it? You know, it doesn't really have it. In fact, the owners tend to park outside the shop, so there's nowhere for sort of customers to park. Parking is almost horrible. But Sudbury actually has a lot of spaces. If you think about it, the actual.
But it's limited on time. Every single one is limited on time. It's free, which is brilliant if you're coming in to pop into the shops and do a bit of shopping, but not if you work there. So how? I mean. My two staff, who, not being funny, they both work part-time. You've met one of them, her situation. They both had parking tickets. Now,
you can still park in the long stay car park by the station. There's nothing to stop that, is there?
No, apart from the fact about it couldn't be further away from my shop. I'm literally up by the Masonic Hall.
That's not.
Yeah, I am. I'm up that end of North Street.
I thought, is there not long stay, you know, where the...
Siam Square, big parking, 3 hours is the most you can be there. That's what I'm saying. There should be a designated area there that you could, because it...
How far away do your staff live? They can't cycle, can they?
I'm sure they could. That's not, I'm not just talking about my staff though, am I? I'm talking about anybody who, so if I've got somebody who lives in Acton, who works, then there's nowhere for them to park. My landlord gave away my parking without me knowing.
The parking issue on the hill, I mean, you know, it makes Brexit look like a nice moderate subject of discussion. I mean, I leave that for the town council. You know, that is for them to deal with. I mean, it's in terms of parking. Is Lee? You still on the call?
Yeah, he's still here.
Don't hide, Lee. You mustn't hide at this point. It's not fair. Any plans from Baber about reforming parking? I don't know at this moment.
Well, I think the point or the question was about the closure of the Market Hill specifically.
Yeah.
And
but that is the town council, isn't it, Lee?
That's the town council. Yeah, and I'm so glad that Michael Highland has left this.
He's Chamber of Commerce, and I think that he's also keen to sort of talk about that. And I have had a number of questions about that very issue.
The Chamber of Commerce have had a lot of their members complain to the committee about the parking on the Market Hill specifically.
I'm sure they have, John. I mean, you know, in Hadley when they had the bollards, you know, I got this amazing assault of correspondence of people wanting me to go to the town council and challenge this. But, you know, some things have to be decided at the appropriate level, and it's not me washing my hands of it. It's their responsibility to, and it's difficult. You know, you've got effectively volunteer councillors there and having to make a pretty difficult decision. I thought they got wrong, I'm afraid, because they overdid it, to be honest. I think
the town council have suggested that it was a government-led sort of suggestion that places should be closed to allow for social distancing.
My own view is, if that was true, every town would have done it.
And actually, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But they don't social distance with me in Tesco's or Sainsbury's. Let me tell you, the people still stretch across me like they're looking down my top. I don't know, but literally, there's no social distancing in supermarkets. It's a free for all. So the fact that I'm outside, I don't know why.
Comment on that one.
it's not joined up anymore, and I think that's the frustrating thing. This particular lockdown wasn't a lockdown. I would have much preferred the country to have been locked down for 4 weeks, everything. I'd have much preferred that. Let's get it over with, like almost like the short, sharp shock, than this.
Well, they did that in Wales, maybe. They did that in Wales, and
and that was rubbish, wasn't it?
Straight back up, and this is what basically you can only so this has.
But we didn't. To be fair, James, we didn't know that at the time. We didn't know that when we decided this particular lockdown. We didn't know that Wales had failed with that fire break.
No, true, but I mean, and there was a perfectly legitimate argument that on the latest lockdown, we could have earlier, say September, this is what Keir Starmer would say, well, he didn't say in September, we could have done what's called a fire break.
At half time, fire break at half term.
You see, at the time, there was no surge in infection, and we wanted, as far as possible, to avoid a national lockdown and have tiers. And I think that was the right thing. But of course, it then...
Can I ask? Sorry, I'm not going to... We spent all this money on the Nightingale hospitals, and I know years ago when we had a TB epidemic, there was TB hospitals. So everybody who had TB was in particular wards, yes, until they found a cure.
Sorry,
keep out, Penny. Joke. That was a joke.
Did I answer that question?
No, hold on.
We've strayed a long way here.
We have strayed a long way. I suppose it's just because I'm questioning quite a lot about this doesn't seem joined up. This just doesn't seem joined up at the moment.
Well, most people don't know.
The Nightingale hospitals should have been used for COVID people. It would have been much easier to nurse people if they all had the same condition in the one place.
I said this, it's not simple. It isn't as simple as that for all kinds of reasons. It really is, not least because infection spreads. You can have.
But if they've all got it, if we've all got it in that hospital, the infection cannot spread any worse than it's got because we've all positive.
But basically, so you then have in your non-COVID, they'll still get it, right? So you take them out, you move them, but in doing that, you spread it. So I've really pushed this.
Okay, all right, I'll accept that.
Lots of people say it, but and I think it is what we're moving towards.
Yeah, I'll accept that.
Stevens, head of NHS England, he didn't want to do it initially because, the people I spoke to the most in the lockdown was the chief executives of our local hospitals all the time. And always they're like slightly cautious on being able to do that. Once you drill into the detail, I mean,
I get it, James. I'm actually, you've won me over for the moment.
We've won one, but we are moving that direction. But where we were on parking on Market Hill, weren't we?
We were, no, just parking.
And then you got away without having to answer it.
Just parking in general. I'm all for traffic wardens. I'm all for people who are parking like idiots.
What about cycling?
We want people to come to town, and if we want people to work in town, and we want to be able to employ people who work in Acton and Long Melford, they've got nowhere to park for more than 3 hours.
Long Melford is surely cyclable.
I'm not just talking about the people who work for me, am I? People who work for me are able-bodied because of what I do.
Have they thought about cycling? Have they tried it?
James, do you have a bike shop?
I have my bike. I cycle. I cycle to Bures from Assington, even if it's -10.
Hold on. What about the blind man who works in an office? What about the,
Hold on, he's not going to drive though, is he? I mean, do me a favour. That's not fair.
Anyway, if I can move on.
Right.
Things unsorted.
Even Ian's having a go at me for that argument. You know what I mean. You know what I mean.
I think we've all, so parking, local issue. I have
Let's park the parking.
Parking, although
I'll
somebody
take that,
did,
we leave.
somebody did a very carefully question. I would love to listen to his advice on how we persuade our town council to listen to its local businesses on parking in the middle of town, etc. So somebody's asking for advice on how they would talk to the town council about parking. There we go.
Well, they should. I think they should ask if they can attend a virtual session of the town council, and then put questions directly to the councillors. I think. Do you do that in Baberley? You still sit virtually, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely, and we've no intention of doing anything else. But yeah, as a local councillor, I would actively encourage people to go along, and that for me is what's missing. There was a great deal of noise about the parking on the Market Hill, and if people want to protest about that, perfectly within their rights to do so. Go along to the virtual meetings, definitely.
Yeah.
Or cycle in.
Or stand as a town councillor at the next election. What about that, eh?
How about that?
Yeah.
But on the cycling, if I just say on cycling that it's one of those things, it's not, so I cycle to Bures Station, and I leave my bike there, and to be honest, there's a phantom who punctures me quite regularly. I don't know why. So I come home from London and there it is. I have to fix my puncture. And so it's by no means an ideal solution, but it's good for your health. You're not using any petrol, so it's free. You don't have to pay to park as long as it's, obviously there are downsides if it's raining, etc. But we're all sturdy Suffolk folk, aren't we? Or Essex. So I do think we should be encouraging more cycling, but it's not easy. And if I wouldn't cycle from Assington into Sudbury unless, you can go down the back from Cornard, but a lot of the routes people would want to take are just not really viable. I do say that, but I think in Sudbury, people coming from Melford, coming from Acton, I think that's probably, we should be encouraging that sort of journey to be by bike. In Long Melford, you can go down the old railway, which is great fun.
Lovely. Well, as you're talking about cycling, although the question that Sarah wants to go and ask is not actually related to cycling, but if you unmute, there we go, you're unmuted. But as a keen cyclist, there we go. You can also shout about the virtues of cycling and ask your question.
Thanks, Penny. My only concern, James, was don't cycle in -10. That worries me. I don't go out in below 4 degrees. So if you could just keep safe, that would be great.
That's a fair point. I mean, if you look at our demographic, for most people, it's a bit of an issue. It's a rural area. So for example, would I let my kids cycle from Assington to Boxford? I mean, down that 1021, that's not safe, right? If I cycle that way, I go round the back, but that gets incredibly muddy and wet. So there's that side of it as well. But I think that there will be people living in parts of Sudbury or Melford where it's viable. We need to encourage it, and we need to, and if it's cold, you just pedal harder.
The only thing I would say is I've probably had more abuse on the road this year from cars than I have, and I am someone, I do pull in if there's a lorry or if I'm holding up traffic. But yeah, I've been called a lot of names. But
as you know, there are some cyclists, they fan out and they don't pull in, and it takes two to tango, doesn't it, on that one?
Yeah, exactly. And we nice ones cop the back of that. But just moving away from any vehicles, really, I work for an importer and exporter. So my responsibility is reading through all of the information, whether it's the Trader Support Services on the Gov website about the VAT deferral, import VAT deferral scheme, the EORI numbers and the process, because we export to Northern Ireland as well as Ireland and import from Europe.
Yeah.
There, I have to say, the information isn't the clearest. I have to give myself gaps in between reading it. But will it be clearer once we have a clearer idea of deal, no deal, and will there be fines? Because it feels like it's we're telling you the information ready from the for the 1st of January, sort of almost that impending, like, if you haven't done it, which I don't think smaller businesses will have geared up for the information that needs to be shared, will there be fines immediately? Will there be a sort of, I know we've had a year period, but will there be a longer period for all businesses to get ready? Because as an example, we use DPD as a courier. They're not geared.
Really?
I think they are, but they're not great with their communication. So.
Well, I mean, the problem is, and many business people made this very legitimate argument, which is we got all these adverts saying you need to be ready. You know, you're running out of time.
Yeah.
They'll say, well, what are the rules? And we're like, well, we're negotiating. And it is very difficult. We had an important breakthrough this week, which was a bill which I've been sitting in the chamber for, because it's a Treasury bill in relation to Northern Ireland, where you may have noticed we've agreed what happens in terms of the border, no deal or no deal. So effectively, you know, the thing about at-risk goods. So these are goods at risk of entering the Republic from Northern Ireland, and therefore, in those cases, there will be effectively there will be EU jurisdiction within Northern Ireland for those specific goods, but the number of those goods has been reduced. We wanted it to be pretty much all goods. So that's only just come out, so there will be more on .gov about that. So at least gives certainty on that part of it and on the VAT side. In terms of things like, so the most obvious one is we know for a fact there will be tariff declarations. Really simple but important point is that in the single market in the customs union where we are now through the transition, it's not that you pay zero tariffs, there are no tariffs. It's borderless. You don't actually have any declaration or anything, right? When we leave on the first, when we go into the long-term deal on the first, even if we have a deal, that even if it's zero tariff, there will still be tariff declaration. So as a very minimum, there will have to be new forms to declare, as you know. But the biggest unknown is what the value of those tariffs will be, because if it's no deal, there'll be some goods which have tariffs, and for some, unfortunately, it will be quite high, mainly food and so on. Lamb, for example, 40%, because these are the default tariffs for third countries. So
some of our goods we have had, we will see an increase on, to the point we're not sure how viable it will be, because unfortunately form that I don't know if the public are ready to take on that when the market,
for example,
already I deal in baby products, baby goods.
Oh, right.
And I can't remember which specific product it was, but I'm sure it's 15 to 20%. When your margins are quite small on those items already, customers aren't going to be prepared to take that increase because there's other choice. But unfortunately, we haven't got a manufacturer of that in the UK, because if we did, we'd be using them 100%. So, well,
I mean, and this is the argument. You know, I think it was it Paul earlier who we were talking about Delphi and the chocolate company. One of the reasons why GCB have bought the plant in Glemsford is because they think they can compete selling chocolate within the UK to people who've been buying it in from Europe. So all these things bring opportunities as well.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, I'm afraid there will be tariffs that make this complicated. And if there's a depreciation in sterling, you know, we could have some issues here. I happen to think, despite all the talk, at the very last minute, we could be talking New Year's Eve. You will have, I think, something will be agreed. That's just my probably optimistic nature. At the moment, all of the new music is terrible. At the moment, no deal looks likely, which is not ideal at all. But in effect, there is a deal on Northern Ireland anyway, because what I've said this week. You'll probably have some agreement around things like lorries coming off Dover, aeroplanes, etc. But yeah, it could be challenging, and someone in your position will be busy. I mean, that's the good news. You know, you're going to have plenty to do.
You're telling me as a we won't have to go back there, but as a limited company owner who hasn't taken dividends, that I'm going to have more work on, on New Year's Eve.
The other thing I didn't say on dividends, which I should have said really, is a company which was taking dividends could have switched to PAYE.
Mm-hmm.
They could have switched during the furlough for the later stages of furlough. And so the gross income they'd have been paid out would have been higher. But you've got to admit, it's to take something for, and I'll say the other thing on dividends, right? At the beginning of the crisis, and you sound very reasonable, if all the people paying dividends had turned around to the government and said, look, we've got to be honest, we've set ourselves up to minimise our tax to you guys, but we're desperate, we haven't got any money, it would have been very different. But it was one of the most aggressive and abusive campaigns. And these are people who have deliberately, significantly reduced their tax bill to the taxman, and they're saying, "You now come and help us," in a really aggressive way. So it didn't help, because it is technically very difficult. It's very, very, because the HMRC has to go by what it can prove. It can't just take someone's word for it, unfortunately. It has to be. And if you look at your self-assessment, you'll see it doesn't say, are these dividends like income? It just says UK, abroad, or unit trust. That's basically what the three questions are.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy one, because clearly, I'm sure you'd agree, we shouldn't be paying to someone who has a large portfolio who's receiving dividends. I mean, it may be that that's their primary income, but that's someone who presumably is quite well off.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunately one of the case of who shouts the loudest, and unfortunately some of the quiet ones were the ones that missed out the most. So, but we digress again.
Yeah. No, but look, I'd love to say I know what's coming, but if I knew, I would be a very wealthy man, probably living in Barbados. I'd put all my savings on the Grand National and so on. So there we go.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
No, you're welcome. There's, I think, one last question, Penny.
Yeah, to see if there's anybody here that would like to ask a question that hasn't. Yeah, John, have you got anything? Oh, Lee, yeah, or both. Actually, we have to come them both because they're both so nice.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so Lee first, and then John.
No, I will give way to John, please.
Oh, politeness. Politeness. It's beautiful.
So I guess my question is a degree of personal interest. Lots and lots of people have moved to working from home, some more successfully than others, I grant you. What's your view as to the longer term kind of effect of that? Clearly, big cities that have large commuter populations are struggling because people are not going in. People working from home potentially are benefiting from the better work-life balance. I think the jury's still out a little bit in terms of how productive some areas of industry are being with people working at home. But I think most of the ones I hear criticism of tend to be public servants. Most of the big organisations, I used to work for Barclays historically, and in India where they had 15,000 people in call centres, all of those staff moved home, and they were working the next day. In the UK, we're still finding bits of our public services don't work because we're just not geared up to use modern technology. And indeed, even in the workplace, lots of the technology is aged. We saw the virus that attacked the health service so badly a year or so back. And even now, those assets are still running outdated and unpatched software.
So when you say public, John, do you mean as in public, big companies or the public sector?
The public, like the NHS, like the local councils, like BABA, like Suffolk County Council, particularly are the ones that seem less able to react. Now, I guess there's a degree of budgets and authorisation. I understand the red tape takes it through that. But it's really just more of a view of, do you think we have made that shift now? Industry will move more towards working from home, or more flexibly certainly, as we sort of come out of the crisis, or do you think we will revert?
Well, before I answer, John, the gentleman who asked me earlier about this, he's got iPad on your. I do apologise. I didn't think the name.
David Percival.
David, sorry, right, David. And John, what is your company, WizKey?
So I do IT support and consultancy for small businesses.
Fine.
I used to run the desktop for Barclays Bank globally, so I
right.
had enough of that, and now I just do IT support for local businesses.
Well, it's a really interesting question for me personally in many ways, because I'm sitting in my garden office. I had this for years because when we set up our company, we thought, you know what, everyone should work from home, and we had, this was in 2004, bear in mind, we had VoIP phones where worked on a network around people's houses, so you weren't sitting in the same room, but it worked like, you know, it rang round as if you were.
Sure.
We did find this problem of recruitment and training, so we would go to a Regis for 3 months and train the person up. And then in terms of Parliament, once we got elected, you know, so I go into London, cycle down to Beers, get the train into London. Very lucky I stay overnight there. But, you know, all of my parliamentary staff are not allowed to come into the office. They have to get a special dispensation from the Speaker. They're working from home. They're in the public sector as it were. And you certainly need to have discipline. You need to be able to monitor outcomes. That's what I found. I once had a member of staff in my own business who eventually I realised just wanted to get laid off. It was a terrible situation. She was part of Harwich, it's quite poor. All the people she knew were on benefits, and she was making deliberate errors. But it's hard, so there's lots of weaknesses in home working. I think one of the biggest problems will be for the larger private companies where, you know, and I think there's been some research on this, to get that sort of creative spark of staff bouncing off each other, etc., is very hard virtually. I think personally Zoom meetings, I mean, this is good. Engagement meetings are fine like this. This is like a sort of, this is like me, you know, I'm fielding questions. But if you have like a meeting where you're trying to work as a team, I do think it's much harder virtually than it is face-to-face. I think there's many. So what I think, you asked about the trends, I think something that I was supporting before Corona. So my first ever German debate in 2015 was on part-time season tickets. And I think you'll get, what will happen is once it reverts to normal, you will get commuting again, but it's far more common to do 3 or 4 days a week. Now, it already was quite common. In fact, the reason I did that debate was because lots of my constituents would say, James, I have to pay, you know, a full fare season ticket, but I'm only going 3 or 4 days. So I thought so I've been campaigning that because I think that's in the rail company's interest. More people will use the train. You'll get more people going in. And I think that's where it will end up personally. So I think you know, let's hope this happens, touch everything. Once we get back to a situation where there is no social distancing, and I do believe that day will come next year, I think we'll love seeing each other again face to face. We'll love having like it was, but people will have changed their expectations. They'll have liked the quality of life, the seeing their family, and I think that you'll get more people wanting that balance even more than now. So you know what it's like. I mean, people. I'm very conscious of that. There are people who commute every day in and out. Before, you know, from Beers, from Sudbury, from Colchester, etc. And on those trains in particular, blimey, a lot of money to pay for a lot of hours. But I just think that there'll be more balance. So I think, you know, for people who specialise in IT solutions for remote working, etc. Yeah, it's going to be a really good time. I think it's hardest for the bigger companies. In terms of your point about the public sector, as I say, so my staff technically are. I'm confident that, you know, I look at what they're doing on casework as it comes in. We're addressing it. I trust Harriet, who's my chief of staff, I trust her to manage them and analyse what they're doing. But if you think about the key bits of the public sector, well, health, you certainly can't do health remotely. Well, I say that, sorry, you can't do hospitals. Obviously, GPs are doing more stuff remotely where it's possible. Yeah. I did my over 40 MOT the other day remotely over the phone, not including bloods, which we did later. Schools is I think the key case. So when in June, the reason I started going back into Parliament in June, when lots of MPs said we shouldn't, and I said, is because it was out of order to tell teachers, you've got to go in, and we stayed working virtually. I felt we had to set an example, and Parliament doesn't work remotely, not really. It's not as effective. But I think that, you know, so schools have got to be face-to-face. A large part of the NHS will be face-to-face. I suppose where this really arises, like David was saying, planning departments, you know, the Information Commissioner's Office, all these bureaucracies, which will have all these people work from home in the public sector, where it's not as easy to judge. You know, if you've got the private sector, you can tell, has that person brought the business in, have they done that's the benefit of the private sector. You have that incentive. So I do accept your point. I think it's a challenge. I'll just say this, that in Westminster, you go down Victoria Street, those buildings are empty. And I said to the Prime Minister, rent them out as affordable housing. Cheap affordable housing, get them refurb them to good quality. And I still think that is what will, I still think there is a real opportunity, because a lot of the conversion from commercial to residential has been poor. It's been seen as a sort of easy way to get housing, whereas actually it is the key to regenerating our towns. You know, central London is dead at times. It's getting busier, but actually if people live there, you get a community, right? So that's how we'll regenerate. We'll take advantage, we'll adapt, we'll take advantage of these things. Once we get through this annoying phase of sort of lockdown, you know, open up, go back in, pay out lots of money, reopen, oh my God, here it comes again, run back in, you know, this terrible, maddening cycle. We will get out of it with the vaccine. Once we do, I think that there's some really big questions about the future of working, but
just one,
like John, you've got to make an opportunity out of it.
Sorry, just one other concern that's growing for me is particularly in regards to security. You know, with more and more people working from home, we're starting to see many of our corporations now are essentially risking their data, their security to people's home broadband, home networks. It's on the same network as the kids that are on, you know, games and this sort of stuff. This week alone, we've seen a state actor hack one of the biggest US cyber security firms and steal some of their tools.
Wow.
It feels as though perhaps that's an area that the government does need to concentrate a bit more on, in terms of, you know, if we are going to be a more sovereign state, we become a much more potentially lucrative attack vector.
John, well, I'm not sure if, you know, whether if we stayed in the EU or leave, whether, you know, we'd still be a target for the Russians and all the rest of it. But you know, it's really interesting to me personally. So my brother Tom, he was employed in a certain interesting part of the public sector, which has a big office in Cheltenham, and did a tour in Afghanistan, all the rest of it. And he then got a job in the cyber sector. And it's so interesting that when lockdown first came in, really worried, but suddenly they realized, like, the business then came in to help people be more secure. So my take on it would be, it's a massive opportunity. You know, I think Britain has a really good offer globally in terms of digital skills. The deal we just signed with Singapore is different from the continuity deal with the EU, because it is more about digital, which is we've got, because of the English language, because we have lots of, you know, we have some really good hubs. This is something we've got to really focus on. I want us to have the best cyber companies outside. Probably the US and Israel are incredibly dominant, I think, but the UK could be a really good player on cyber. So I think we should see these things as an opportunity. The same with home working, like Beverly's got a van, you know, in all adversity, you find adjustment. I mean, even on the fruit farm, you know, I know it's not possible at the moment, but there'll be investment in technology for picking, because there are a few, you know, all these things, as difficult as it is, what matters is that as a country, you're able to adjust. You've got to be flexible, dynamic, and, you know, and Farley, your point, it's not going to help if we get tied up in knots on January the 1st, I realise that, but in terms of our fundamental direction, where we will succeed, you know, we're leaving a big block where it has enormous trading clout, but it moves more slowly. We're still a big economy, and we will be able to be nimble. Once we get through this phase, I want to get a deal, because I want to shut that off and say, we know where we stand, Now let's look at, you know, Asia Pacific, all the rest of it. And I think this thing around digital, around our services sector, we've got an amazing future, actually, I think. And I think just all these changes will bring lots of opportunities. So the glass is half full. It may not seem it. In fact, it'll be full soon. I promise you.
You can't drink anything.
Very good question, John.
Unless you have
Sorry?
a Scotch egg. So, but you can't drink unless you have a Scotch egg.
I was just going to see if I could butt in, and John, you just mentioned about security and stuff like that. Just on a local level, it's actually, I mean, with everyone's home security and things like that, I think a lot of it is down to education as well, and educating not just kids but parents about, you know, basic things that everyone can do at home. And it's something that I had actually planned to do at Caffeine Lounge. And before we had even opened, I'd actually already spoken to the National Crime Agency about you know, doing something at our venue here in Sudbury, you know, to help educate parents and kids, you know, about, you know, using the internet safely and
using multiple passwords, the same password on lots of different.
Yeah, and just, you know, kind of giving those tips. So it's something that we're still going, you know, planning to do at some point when we can all reopen, and you know, maybe, you know, John, if you want to get involved in that as well, that could be something there. But yeah, we're definitely planning to help, you know, locally as well, because education is a big thing, and we see kids, you know, getting, you know, even though I was actually hacked the other day, my gaming accounts got taken and had to try and get it back. So it, you know, happens to everyone, and you know, we'll do what we can to help as well.
Yeah, but you're right, and the future opportunities in data and you know, coming up with solutions to the fact that, I mean, I think someone did come up with an amazing idea around passwords. There's one password you had to something which remembered all of your passwords, but no one's really cracked it, because at the end of the day, it's not easy. I struggle, and if I'm honest, I do repeat some of my passwords across a few things that there.
The one bit of
I feel I'm all right.
The one, yeah, biggest thing I can help with everyone now is having two-factor authentication on. So that's where you get, you know, a little code on your phone or email.
Absolutely.
And that will help dramatically.
And saves devices. It knows the device, right? You know, things like that.
Not all. Sometimes it will just ask for it every single time, because then there's no question, you know, it's you. You know, it will just come to your phone straight away anyway, as a text, an email, or through an app. But that puts off a lot of hackers straight away, and it's almost impossible. Not completely impossible, but almost impossible to actually then hack that account. So,
Penny, I think it's 9:05, is it? I think
it is. Yeah, maybe we should call it a night. Leslie, you have a burning question.
No, I don't have a burning question at all, Penny. What I will do is just be the first